Immanuel in Madison, Wisconsin.
Hi, how are you doing?
Just fine. How are you?
Just fine.
Doing well. Just want to start off by saying really enjoy what you guys do. I think the open and honest conversation is great. I am a Bible-believing Christian, so I'll start with that just to let everyone know. So my question, or the thing I wanted to discuss with you, is the term atheist, and really just getting a definition from you really quickly, just to make sure that we're talking about the same things when we're moving forward.
An atheist is a person who doesn't believe in any gods.
Okay. So do you believe that that stance is one of objectivity and logic, like that to name oneself atheist is a stance of objectivity, logic, sort of scientific, etc.?
I think it doesn't make sense to commit to belief in a thing unless there's a good reason to believe it.
I think that's an excellent statement as well.
Okay.
So the last time I called in, it was a couple months ago, I had introduced the concept of binary claims and how atheists reject basically the supernatural, anything that can't be observed, tested, etc. And they say, I can't believe in that because XYZ, I can't test it.
Sure, it doesn't mean a positive certainty that the thing can't exist. It's just that without a reasonable way to test your beliefs, there's no point in putting the belief in that.
Okay. I can agreed. That's a view that you guys hold. But then again, that being supernatural and natural being a binary existence, so anything that's not supernatural is natural, and vice versa. If you reject the supernatural, do you also reject, say, the claim that there's a natural cause to the universe?
Well, first off, when you say supernatural, you're talking about supernatural as if from the premise that such a thing exists. So we're not necessarily on board with you there. So I guess what I would need to know is, what, in your opinion, is the supernatural? How is it defined? What are its rules, et cetera, et cetera? What do you mean when you say supernatural?
Well, I would just go by any sort of Webster definition of supernatural, which would be anything that could not be included as natural in the natural world as we experience it today, as we would define natural today, which changes every day. But
well, I guess the problem is getting to that criteria, right? I mean, for example, would you know if you are encountering evidence of a thing that thing is not part of the natural world? I mean, it would seem in some ways that if you have encountered evidence for it, something that you are experiencing or observing in some way, then that is part of your experience, and we're natural beings, and so what sort of evidence can you look at to say there is a supernatural existence in addition to a natural one? What is it that persuades you that that's actually real?
I mean, we're speaking more conceptually than anything else, in the same way that I can't say, like, if you talk about love, it's like, well, what can you test and observe that would demonstrate? It's one of those, like, it's a concept.
You can test and observe lots of things that demonstrate love.
Concepts.
Yeah. Love is a thing that can be observed and can be demonstrated. Love is a human emotion, and people behave towards one another. If you feel a certain emotion towards someone, whether it's love, whether it's hate, good feelings or bad feelings, those emotions that you have, those feelings that you have for the person will be things that you express in your behavior towards them. So that's how we know that love exists. That's how we know that hate exists. But we're not talking about human emotions here. We're not talking about those kinds of abstracts. What believers in the supernatural are claiming is that there is a realm of reality that is apart from the natural realm of reality in which we live. There are beings in this realm of reality. There are locations in this realm of reality. For example, if you believe in heaven and hell or other kinds of worlds. So this is very different from saying, well, you can't necessarily, have this kind of observation about something like human feelings. Well, we know what human feelings are. They're a product of our natural world. They're a product of our minds and our brains and our emotions that we experience. So that's not really an accurate comparison. So what if you're talking about the existence of a realm of reality that is apart from the one we inhabit, then we want to know how you define that. How do you receive that experience? What evidence is there for it?
Well, so the evidence for that existence would be the same as, say, the evidence for a historical event that there was an eyewitness to. It would be that someone saw, X, Y, Z, someone saw an angel, someone saw God, something that is clearly not something that you would encounter in the natural world on a regular basis, something supernatural in that case. Let me ask you
this. Suppose somebody came up to you and they said they saw Allah, like, the Muslim God. He was wearing a turban and he went around with a scimitar and he was like, I have no son. I'm probably really butchering what Allah is like, but suppose somebody told you that they saw something that was definitely a God who said that Islam is the correct religion. Would you believe them?
Well, I wouldn't.
Okay, why not?
Reason, because for the same reason I don't believe in the flying spaghetti monster.
Okay.
Is because the flying spaghetti monster, as an argument, is terrible because we know who made it. We know why they invented this flying spaghetti monster. We don't know who created. We don't know everything about who created Islam any more than we know who created Christianity. What you're saying is you don't believe stuff just because somebody said they ran into them. Yes.
Just because somebody said they saw something isn't a particularly good reason to believe an unusual claim, right?
It isn't. But then again, it's a reason to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, we were done. It's your turn.
Okay. It's a reason. It's one of those things where, in the pursuit of truth, right? The scientific method is one pursuit of truth, and there are sciences that pursue truth through the scientific method, through observing, testing, etc. History is not science, right? It's not. You can't prove that King Henry VIII.
Yeah, but there are standards for history, right? Historians don't just come across every single manuscript they see and say, oh, we have the Odyssey here. It says Zeus was stomping around on the battlefield. They don't just unconditionally accept stuff that people said, right? It may not be a hard science like physics in that you can't repeat everything that you see, but there are standards for weeding out unlikely claims even by historians.
Yes, but see, the problem, the thing that history, the limitation, I should say, is that the mere fact that one manuscript, recorded one event, and one event was quoted by multiple manuscripts, doesn't make that event more likely to be true.
Well, actually,
you have more evidence for that event occurring. That's simply it.
Oh, I would think that it would make it, the more that you have to corroborate a claim, then the more substance the claim has. Again, it may still not get you to the point of conclusive irrefutable proof. But for example, something that may be an event that is widely recorded through multiple sources and through disparate sources, it is the sort of thing that you can say, well, this is more likely to be an accurate account of something, or it's likely to get us closer to an accurate account of something than, for example, one person, scribbling, something down on a papyrus parchment somewhere. So corroboration does help. That's one of the tools that Russell was talking about that historians use. For example, there's a well-known historian from antiquity called Herodotus, who wrote this extensive history about the Mediterranean world, and he traveled to Egypt and all around and this, that, the other, and recorded. But unfortunately, Herodotus had a really poor methodology, which was he was something of a sucker, and he would travel to Egypt and these foreign lands where, just like today, you would get these eager, smiling tour guides who would, for whatever coin he wanted to put in their hands, would just babble off whatever cockamamie story they came up with. And Herodotus eagerly jotted all this sort of stuff down as if these were amazing stories and histories that he was getting, and published all of this. But of course, many years later, the lack of corroboration between, for some of the accounts of things that Herodotus wrote about, coupled with a knowledge about the culture at the time, has led a lot of historians to think, okay, well, Herodotus, on the one hand, he's a very important figure, and he did offer us a lot of valuable insights at that period of time, but at the same time, he was not a terribly critical thinker in terms of what he would write about. He was a bit of a sucker at times, and he got quite a number of things that we now know to be wrong. So in terms of being able to corroborate claims, that is a very important thing.
Yes, it's very important from our ability to look back and say, from what we know from the evidence that we have, like we can say more definitively that maybe possibly this happened. But from a truth-seeking perspective, from just the perspective of what actually occurred, it is not. Like it does not, like having more than one person write something down.
Why do you think it does?
Make it more likely?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Same way. Well, I'll give you an example now.
Okay.
Like Facebook, like a ton of people write things on Facebook, and they only write it on Facebook. They don't write it anywhere else. In 1,000 years, when people look back and they look at what someone wrote, if they said that they had papaya on Tuesday. Like, it doesn't matter that they didn't write it in multiple places.
But
like,
I mean,
they literally had papaya.
But
Right.
the principle at work here is that the kinds of things that you're talking about on Facebook are really mundane claims, right? I mean, if I tell you right now that I had a papaya a couple of days ago, and I didn't, but
That's okay.
but if I told you like I had spaghetti. Spaghetti is a really common thing. I mean, there's spaghetti all over the place. There's lots of ways to verify that spaghetti actually exists, and it's a thing that people have for lunch all the time. So when I say I had spaghetti for lunch, there's not really much point in doubting me because that is such a tedious and ordinary claim that unless I'm a compulsive liar, then you have no reason to doubt me. On the other hand, suppose that I said...
It's not the sort of thing that there's any point in lying about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, why would you lie about what you had to eat for lunch?
But then on the other hand, suppose that I said the other day for lunch, suppose that I said the other day I had grilled unicorn for lunch.
Right.
That's not a very typical claim. And that's the kind of thing where even if you think that I'm a generally honest person, you might ask me for a few details, and you might want to know, like, what restaurant did I go to, and what's the chef's name, and can you talk to him, right?
Exactly. I think that's exactly true.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Okay.
that's what we mean when we say, like, the more extraordinary a claim, the more backup it really needs. And a guy rising from the dead, you have to agree, is not a very typical result.
It's not a very typical result, and I would say that claim, again, compared to the flying spaghetti monster, has history. It has a historical.
I don't think historians really.
Jewish
Well,
culture.
yeah. Yeah, but again, that's it. When you're talking about an extraordinary claims versus non-extraordinary claims, I mean, okay, you might say, well, there is a history behind this. For example, there is a religious institution that has existed for a great many centuries,
And that is certainly true.
Yeah, and that's certainly true. But that doesn't really change the basic criterion of if you're still claiming something extraordinary, something that we know goes against what is commonly understood about how nature works, then it's not enough simply to say, well, but there is all this history about it, because then what you're sort of engaging in a very common logical fallacy at that point. It's like, well, this is something that has been believed for a long time, therefore it is more likely to be true. Well, that's not necessarily why something's likely to be true. I don't care if people have believed for 2,000 years or for 20 years or for 2 weeks about the resurrection of a dead body. I'm still going to require the same level of evidence before I accept that claim as true.
Well, I guess where you sort of erred a little bit there is that it actually does matter in terms of God. Like if God, like when you look at the paradigm, it has for internal validity. Like it matters how long and how many people actually believe this if God exists.
And I'll tell you why it doesn't.
No one believes in Zeus anymore.
And I'll tell you why it doesn't. Let me just point out, Immanuel.
Let me finish.
Okay, go ahead and finish.
Okay, but we're gonna, Immanuel, we are gonna have to wrap up this call pretty soon because.
But go ahead and make your point. Make your point. Go ahead and make.
Yeah, sure. So Zeus and what the Olympians believed. If what they believed actually was true, like looking back, let's say that we were going to be objective and evaluate what they said is true, at the possibility that it was true. The fact that no one believes it anymore, the fact that we've gone up to Mount Olympus and we know that
but
they
people
don't
still
live
believe
there,
Islam.
there was no paradigm time for them to explain why someone would be able to go up to Mount Olympus and not see them there. Like there's not a lot of internal validity for that religion. However, for those that have stood the test of time, like they have more internal validity than those that didn't. Like just in the comparison way, in an objective evaluation way, and that's why that's something to evaluate.
Well, let me go ahead and give you a quick comparison. Again, using your climbing the mountain example, there have been, for example, numerous archaeological expeditions to find, for example, Noah's Ark. And these have either failed or they've claimed to find Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark has been found something like 17 or 18 times, and so in different spots. So again, in terms of internal validity, you're ignoring one thing, which is for in many cases, people who are genuine and devoted believers in a particular belief system might be doing their whole process a bit backwards. In other words, they will be looking for something to prove a pre-existing belief rather than let's just simply see what the evidence shows. But getting beyond getting beyond that, if you're just going to argue that because a belief has a great deal of longevity, it's more likely to be accurate and true, those Olympian gods that you talk about were worshipped for quite a bit longer than to date the Christian God has been worshipped. Christianity is a religion that's been going for about 2 millennia now. Artemis was a goddess who was worshipped for about 4,000 to 4,500 years. The Olympian gods were worshipped for about that period of time. The ancient Egyptian gods were worshipped for maybe around 5,000 to 6,000 years. So longevity is not really a good criteria for truth. Because there are a lot of religions and a lot of gods who are a lot longer running. They've had a great many more seasons than Christianity has.
See, but then it really, the past seasons matter less than the present, because, again, if those gods existed, why would they not be worshipped now? Like, it'd be now looking back. Like,
do you think that if you had lived, if you had lived in ancient Greece, it would have been a good idea then to believe in the Greek gods?
I believe there are reasons then not to believe in the Greek gods, yes.
I believe there are reasons
in the
now.
same way that we have more evidence now.
And I believe now there are good reasons not to believe in the Christian God. And that is regardless of how many people and for how long they have believed a thing.
And what you're essentially saying, Immanuel, is that the point you're making is basically that at a certain point in history, while it might have been a reasonable thing to believe in those gods, our actual knowledge of the real world through science, mainly through the scientific method, has since made those belief systems obsolete. So you don't see as many believers in the Olympian gods or the Egyptian gods anymore in this day and age. Why? Because, for example, our scientific understanding of the world and the universe means that we know that the sun is not, a god in a chariot riding across the sky. We know it's a star. We know it's a big ball of gas, etc., etc. So what you are essentially telling us is that religions eventually become obsolete the more our actual scientific real-world knowledge gives us a more complete picture of our reality. The supernatural ultimately always gives way to the natural. And our point is that we think that just because Christianity happens to be the religion of our culture, our opinion is that our science and what we understand about the world through science doesn't make the Christian God any more valid than those gods, and we think that ultimately the Christian God is going to be more and more and more weakened, belief in that God, the more we understand about our reality. And we are already seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a whole lot less Christian belief, for example, in the European democracies, and the more technologically advanced, educated parts of the world, Christianity is a very minor part of the culture. America's rather unusual in that we still have a very strong Christian culture, I think mainly because it's a very well-funded and very politically active Christian culture. But if you look in a lot of the countries where things are getting done, Scandinavian countries, Europe, what have you, very, very few people take Christianity as seriously as Americans do.
I would agree. I would say that the scientific method, by a lot of people's standards, because a lot of people get a very cursory knowledge of what the scientific method is, they take it with more, how should I say, steel than it should be taken, than even scientists who did the experiments would take it. And I feel like that is more the reason for the progression away from God, is because people have a belief that because scientists saw this, like, this must be true, whereas scientists are like, this is what we've observed, and I'm a scientist myself. Like, this is what we can say based on what we've observed. These are conclusions that we make from that.
Yeah.
What kind of scientist are you?
Well, I got my bachelor's in biochemistry. I finished my Pharm D, so I am a pharmacist, and I'm currently getting my master's in pharmacy administration.
I'm not sure that qualifies you yet as a professional scientist, but
but you have an interest in science.
But you're right. They do that.
I have a Pharm D.
I mean, science.
I read scientific studies for a living.
Right.
Fair. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think we're going to have to move on. I was trying to say not that people don't like you, but that people don't like it when one call runs the entire show. But it's been a good conversation, and you're welcome to call back another week.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Take care,
Thanks,
Emmanuel. Thanks for calling.